All right, well, Dan Winters, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming down.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Let me come down to your really cool studio.
Very, 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 very happy you're here. You made quite an effort to get down here.
Yeah, so you get a chance to talk to Dan Winters. I'm going to make the trip, man.
Right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And definitely, I got to give a big thank you to your wife, Catherine, for help set this up. Have you guys always worked together?
Yeah, we've worked together for coming up on 28 years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, we've been married 27, and yeah, she, I don't know. I shudder to think what my life would be without her. I know it would be a much different path than the one I've taken, for sure.
That's awesome, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, because how important is she, like, into, I guess, even just the photography business aspect?
She does everything.
Yeah.
She takes care of everything. Yeah. I just make pictures.
Did you work with any, like, reps or anything prior to that? This you guys?
Never had a rep. Always stayed away from reps because I was working a lot. So it never seemed like I needed one. And then when I met her, I was on an assignment, actually, for Vanity Fair in Los Angeles, and she was my weekend contact because she was in the film industry, and she was a post-production supervisor of a film called Let Sleeping Dogs Lie. And the two principal actors, Tom Sizemore and Dylan McDermott, I was photographing them. And the director was Charles Finch, Peter Finch's son. And she was doing post-production supervision on it, and they were doing looping. They were doing ADR all weekend. So she was my contact, which she'd never had been a contact for a photo shoot. It was an odd thing for her even, you know?
Serendipity.
Yeah, so I went a day early. We kind of started flirting on the phone a little bit. Like, I lived in New York and she lived in LA, and we kind of established really quickly that we were both single. And, you know, so of course there was a little bit of expectation. And so she offered to help me scout near where the ADR session was taking place. So I went to her house and, you know, to pick her up to go scout, and she was in her garage sweeping, looking beautiful. And, it was just inseparable since that day. So
that's awesome,
pretty interesting,
man.
Yeah, actually.
That's really cool. And, you know, I was excited. I know you're really into, like, aerospace and everything. So let's get down to brass tacks, Dan. Did the moon landing happen?
Oh, yeah.
What do you say to those conspiracy theorists?
You know, it's funny you asked me that question, because when I speak, I always ask the audience, when I get into kind of my aerospace, like, section of my lecture, because I do a lot of aerospace photography, I always ask the audience if there's anyone in the audience that doubts the moon landing took place. And invariably you'll get a hand or two. And I always say, see me after, because I'm always curious, like, what their argument is. Like, you know, it's kind of preposterous. You know, it's like a flat earth argument. Like, it's really easy to go online, and if you're looking for confirmation bias, like, find enough people that are telling you the earth is flat or the moon landing was a hoax to kind of, like, affirm your sort of, like, belief, even if it's in its infancy. So people always have, you know, information about it, and it's always very, very easy to explain to them. And to a degree, you know, I don't look down at all on someone like that. I feel like I try to educate them and say, okay, the reason there aren't any stars is because the latitude of the film would not allow for the stars to be exposed when you're exposing with daylight. The reason this happened is because of this. The reason this happened is because of this. Because there are all these, you know, questions that they'll ask, like, oh, the Van Allen radiation belt, you couldn't go through it. It's like, well, actually, it's pinched in two places and you can go through it.
Yeah.
You're exposed to radiation, but, you know, that's just a part of space travel.
And the flag was one. I remember it was like the flag waving, but they made it with, like, wires or something.
Yeah, it was made with an aluminum rod.
Yeah.
And it was actually a part of a handle of another implement that they used. And then when they finished using that implement, then they used it as the flagpole. And if you think about a vacuum, no atmosphere at all, if you touch the flag, if you flick it even, it's not going to stop moving for a while until the tinselary characteristics of that rod come to equilibrium, right? So it looks like it's sitting there waving. Actually, it's not at all waving. It's just wiggling around. There's tons of footage of astronauts at 1 frame per second, which is incredibly accelerated, moving around, and that flag, it looks like it's made out of rock. It's so steady. So, you know, it's really simple.
I know. It was just funny. I just had to ask you. It's just funny to think about.
Yeah.
What is it about the aerospace stuff that kind of interests you? Have you always just been kind of interested in it since you were a kid, or like?
Yeah, you know, I grew up, so I'm 57, or I'll be 57 this year, and I kind of grew up in an era where I honestly feel like, the heroes were kind of more in the sciences. There was still a lot of like film actor heroes and stuff, but they always represented, like you think about John Wayne, like John Wayne represented to a degree like the military, because his films were made with the cooperation of the military, and it was all, and certainly all of his westerns, but Jimmy Stewart, was a B-24 pilot in the Second World War, and he was, he exited the Air Force National Guard as a general, and there were sort of these heroic figures that we grew up with, and certainly the astronauts in the '60s. I mean, my '60s was kind of my coming of age, right? I was born in '62, so I kind of witnessed, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Soyuz, Skylab, shuttle, all those things were kind of part of like my experience. And, I was always very, very inspired by that. It's interesting. I feel like my purpose or my role in flight and manned space flight and flight is much more the observer role. Like I have no interest whatsoever I don't like flying in small aircraft. I get sick. I would have no interest really in going into space. Although if I were offered that free of charge, which that would never be the case, I would probably, I would reluctantly, like, because, I know how special that would be, take someone up on it. But yeah, I feel like as an observer and a chronicler, like that's my role. And I'm grateful that I've done so much of it that NASA acknowledges that, I am out there like promoting sort of like their mission, and I feel like it's been a really great partnership.
Yeah, like in your book, Road to Seeing, which I recommend to any like young photographer or anybody in general, really, you kind of talked about NASA. You're like, people don't even know the roster anymore. For you, it almost sounded, it was like some people are like sports fans. You were talking about like, this is my roster of like, it was just so funny the way you described it,
It's true. I mean, when I was a kid, you could, I could name like the majority of the astronauts that were sort of like had flight status at NASA, and my friends could, and we all built models, and we all like flew model rockets, and there was definitely like a more, I feel honestly, like my youth, there was much more of like an internal dialogue going on. There was a much more experiential dialogue, the idea of like crafting, making things, spending a bunch of time building a rocket, going out into a field and launching it, and having that experience, that kind of scientific experience. I think that was much more a part of my youth, I'm not saying like across the board to generalize that was everyone's, but I raised bees. I still raise bees. I started when I was 9 raising bees. It's like the experience of like the biological sciences and the experience of sort of like the physical sciences was always something very interesting to me. So yeah, I mean, as photographers, we're dependent on subject matter, right? We can't like, photographs don't like conjure themselves out of the ether, right? We have to like point our camera at something. So we make choices, like what are we going to point our camera at,
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of interesting thing. Like looking at your photography, it seems like you've really taken like your interests and your hobbies and really kind of applied it to your work. Like it's like your aerospace or your bees, or that's just, you've always just kind of like try to find your hobbies and bring it into your photography work pretty much.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Jay Maisel said something really interesting. And if you haven't seen Stephen Wilkes' film called Jay Myself, which just premiered at the New York Documentary Film Festival, I went to the premiere. It was amazing. Jay was like a great hero of mine growing up as well. But Jay said his incredible quote by him, which I've always loved, which is, if you want to become a better photographer, become a more interesting person. Yeah. And that's so true, right? It's like curiosity fuels photography, right? The idea of, becoming aware and then interested in something to the point where you want to like create like a lasting image of it. I mean, there's a profundity to that, I think, whether it's skating or, bees or aerospace or whatever it is, the idea of like honestly looking at a subject and then sort of like tackling it photographically is, we were talking earlier about weddings, Yeah. It's like weddings are, Larry Fink's photographs of weddings are like unbelievable, right? So I remember you saying like something like most photographers wouldn't want you to know that you shot weddings. but look at what's possible. Like what Larry does is like mind blowing, right? So, it's just about how you apply yourself to that subject.
Yeah, I think that's like the coolest thing about photography is like what other thing like tool is going to give you access to all these things. And you don't even need to be like this successful photographer to get access to things. You could be like, if you approach people the right way, like if you want to photograph your local pizzeria or whatever, if you kind of engage with those people, I think it's just opened so many doors,
You're absolutely right. It's a unique experience for most people to be photographed, like with in any kind of elevated way, like as a professional, and I'm mindful of that when we shoot people that are not sort of luminaries, but are like kind of normal folk, which, I do a fair amount of that. When we do those pictures, I'm really mindful that, I have the awareness that even though this is like another day at the office for me, which is true, it's a special event for people. Mm-hmm. And can be, a lot of people are photographed often and it's a chore, but some people are photographed never. Like it'll be one time in their life that they're photographed like, professionally.
Yeah.
So, but you are right. You can kind of apply it to anything. You can go to a construction site and do portraits of the workers or what, the sky's the limit.
Endless.
Yeah, it's endless. You're absolutely right. It's endless.
Yeah, it's kind of actually some of my favorite work of yours is like you have some really cool photos of like welders or like scientists. And, the one thing I'm kind of curious about, like obviously you've shot a lot of celebrities, but that's not all that you do. Mm-hmm. Do you find it harder to make a compelling portrait of a well-known person, a celebrity, or just an unknown person? Do you feel like it's a difficult thing one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like if it's like oftentimes sort of, for example, like if we'll break down celebrities into sort of like luminaries in society, right? So sports figures, musical figures, actors, etc. You could say politicians to a degree as well. Just there's an awareness of the process that I find a lot of people like that have because they've been exposed to it a lot. And so it's easier to get inside of them quickly. Mm-hmm. Like they're comfortable, first of all, sitting down. Oftentimes, if you're shooting someone that's not kind of adept at being photographed, getting them to the point where you're actually making photographs that are compelling can take a lot longer. Yeah. So as far as easy goes, yeah, I would say it's easier probably to shoot sort of like celebrities. It's easier. Yeah. Camera awareness is a huge thing right off the bat. But, I think photographing just normal folk is, I don't know. I think the key to sort of success in the kind of portrait world in general is just the ability to kind of have a connection to someone and one that's not contrived.
Yeah, I think for me, like I said before, the photos I really love of yours are like might be like your friends or like the welders, like I said, or like people you don't know. Is with celebrity photography, when you look at it, a lot of times you already have like a context to it. You already have a story in your mind because you might have seen their movie or listened to their music. And the thing I'm drawn to is like when you're shooting these everyday people, it's more you don't know about them, so you can kind of create a story in your mind. It's not really a question, but I've always just kind of.
No, it's a good observation. Yeah. I mean, you do. And also, part of it is too, is like, talking about that person, like what's your life? What's your daily life? What does your typical day look like? Mm-hmm. Give me a sense of, like how you navigate the earth, like regularly, just to get an idea of, connecting and, out of that conversation will probably come connections. I mean, there's a reason I think that, movie stars are exalted in our society, and it's not a new thing. I hear people talk about like the cult of celebrity and this and that, and that's absolutely a falsehood. If you look at a photograph of a magazine rack from 1936, almost the entire thing is like movie star magazines. It's unbelievable. I've seen this before, and I have a lot of like old photo plays and this and that. And the reason I think is that first of all, like we need to keep telling the story. Like the story is important for us, the hero myth, whatever it is, right? Just like success against all odds, the guy gets the girl, whatever it is, tragedy, comedy. We all relate to that. And when we have an actor in a film that helps us with that story, right? Tells us that story. And then you saw that movie in Massachusetts and I saw that movie in LA. You and I have a shared experience.
Yeah.
We can talk about that movie through that actor. We weren't even we were 3,000 miles apart, but we still have a shared experience. And so I think that that's, probably like the driving force behind kind of the idea of like actors being exalted. And it's not a new thing, like I said, and I don't buy into the whole all we focus on now is like celebrities. Yeah, there is a focus on that. I think the thing that we should really be mindful of, okay, isn't like actors that are actively trying to tell a story. It's these YouTube 16 million followers, that chicks that like do stupid shit on YouTube and they get 16 million followers. It's mindless. That's the dumbing down.
There's YouTube is wild.
Or
it's
Instagram,
wild.
Any of that stuff.
There's like videos like people, I'm going to eat 40,000 calories and watch my video, like, subscribe.
It's the dumbest thing ever. I've seen some of these things on Instagram too. There's one, there's some of these videos that are they're just the stupidest things in the world, and these kids just eat them up, and that really is the dumbing down. I was reading this article about music and music becoming, I think the headline caught me. It was like in the Atlantic, and it was talking about how like music has become dumber, and they basically take like notes and length of songs and stuff, and they came up with an algorithm.
Yeah.
And like like the 70s is where it peaked, and then it started to go down, and now it's like they were calling it like this time that we're in is like this really dumbed down music. So it's funny. My son will play who was that one song he's been playing for, like, I'm riding on my horse. It's like some song. And
it just came out, right?
Yeah.
It was with Billy Ray Cyrus. It's
know.
like Old Town Road. It was just one of those things that went viral or whatever.
Dumbest song.
But I talk about music with my brother a lot because people say that. But there still is amazing music being made. Like
100%.
Gary Clark Jr., a Texas guy.
Right around the corner. I know Gary.
Amazing people.
Yeah, Gary lives right around the corner from here. And I know Gary, and he's a really great guy. In fact, he's going to come over here. I have some old wire recorders, and he's going to come over here, and we're going to record him with my wire recorders out in the house. Or I'm going to go over. He has a barn. We might record in the barn. Mm-hmm. There is incredible music being made, and there always was. Mm-hmm. So like if you go to an 80s party, for example, right? And people are supposed to dress up in 80s, right? So the girls dress up like Flashdance, or they dress up like hair band rockers, and the guys dress up, right? So that's supposed to be emblematic of the 80s. Yeah. So that's all kind of, in my opinion, like kind of the worst part of the 80s, right? We had like REM and the Replacements, and we had incredible music in the 80s as well, you know? And that's sort of, that part's overlooked. So, Tom Waits came into his own in the 80s. It's just like, it's just funny where we shine our light. But, usually popular, pop music, and popular culture stuff is where we kind of identify like a time period, And that's not necessarily, that's a generalization of that time period. Yeah, but definitely. I'm right with you about Gary, profoundly talented guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of music. You just got to search it out more because they're not going to get on top 10 radio in your car pretty much. But yeah, it's just... You just got to search it out. But speaking about films and stuff, you're a big aerospace guy, did you see the recent Apollo 11 movie?
I have seen it projected 3 times.
What did you think? For me, it was like, for anybody who hasn't seen it, go check it out. Apollo 11, it was like a master class in film editing.
So anybody that hasn't seen it, go see Apollo 11 because it was a master class in film editing. I'm going to echo your sentiments.
For real, though.
Because it's phenomenal. Yeah. It's absolutely unbelievable. And it's playing in one theater here, and I may go a 4th time to see it just because it needs to be seen on a screen. Yeah. And I know that. And, I feel like films, we carry them with us in our life. And that experience of seeing it on a screen versus seeing it even on like one of my big TVs at home is going to be profoundly different. Mm-hmm. In fact, I pre-ordered it yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
On Amazon.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to getting the Blu-ray.
What do you take most away from watching that film?
Well, I mean, a bunch of things. The music blew my mind. I thought the music was incredible. Obviously, the editing. What I liked about it. Now, I will preface all this by saying that Al Reinert was a very close friend of mine. He passed away 3 months ago. He directed For All Mankind, which, in my opinion, is still like the documentary about the Apollo program. Mm-hmm. It's what Al did was he was given access to original film at NASA. They set up an optical printer in Houston on site. They took the original material. They made 35 millimeter internegs out of it. They sent it off to be processed in New York. He worked on it for 8 years. He interviewed of the living astronauts at the time. He interviewed the majority of them, and he used all this. I'll use the term remastered. That usually applies to like a digital term, but remastered footage with narration only by astronauts, no talking heads at all, and music by Brian Eno.
Ooh,
and it's
I love Brian Eno.
Mind blowing.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. Owls is a poem, and Apollo 11 to me is a journey.
Okay,
it's two different films. But if I had the choice, Owls definitely would win out. It's poetic.
Yeah.
Literally, I've watched that film and honestly wept.
Yep.
And I actually wept tears the first time I watched Apollo 11 with my wife.
Yep.
When the launch took place.
I
physically started crying when the launch took place.
The thing that I took away from it was, I didn't grow up in that era. It brought the community together. Like the footage of like people were they were outside in this like watching. It was just like thousands of people and it's everywhere. Yeah. And I can't really think of like coming over here. I was trying to think of like a thing nowadays. Maybe like the 4th of July fireworks or something that brings the community together. But I don't know.
And that was worldwide.
Yeah,
so
I know.
That big monitor was at Trafalgar Square in London, which they showed in the film. And they had one at Times Square and all over the world. I'm sure in Paris they talked about it. The woman in Paris talking about how she felt like she was sure the Americans could do it. It really united the world. I mean, that was the whole point of the mission. The mission patch that they wore on their spacesuits, the Apollo 11 patch, all it said on it was Apollo 11, and it had an eagle with an olive branch. And the mission patches prior to that and after that, all of them had the crew members. So that technically should have said Armstrong, Aldrin, Collins. And they kept it off intentionally because they wanted that mission to be for all mankind, which is the whole kind of like the gist of that. And actually, Neil was such a great choice, in my opinion, for the part of Armstrong. I mean, for the role of first man on the moon, because he did have a depth to him that sort of like, for me, transcended like the test pilot stereotype. If you think about like his words, right? It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And then you think about Pete Conrad, Apollo 12, the next guy out the door, right? He said, oh, that may have been a little step for Neil, but it was a big one for a little guy like me. Like that is completely lacking profundity to me. Yep. And that's a moment when we need profundity. You have to put aside your like comical self or whatever it is. And I'm so glad that Pete Conrad, who was scheduled actually to be the first guy, Conrad was meant to be the first guy.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was meant. They didn't know who was going to be because it was based on the success of each mission.
Yep.
And so 11 was okay. It's going to be go time. I don't think it was an accident that Neil was kind of slotted there, but I'm really grateful that he was the one. And I think the other astronaut that I always really loved and respected was Dave Scott, which was Apollo 15. Certainly Gene Cernan, but Dave Scott was kind of amazing because he really took it upon himself to fiercely study geology and really pushed for the landing site that they used in the Apennines to try to kind of paint a picture of like the origins of the moon. And, 15 still stands as the most successful scientific mission with regards to like data collected.
Okay.
And so even though there were 17 missions or up to 17 and that was actually Jack Schmitt, who was a geologist in 17. 17 was Cernan and Schmitt on the moon. But and then First Man, which with Ryan Gosling, which I shot the poster for, that blew my mind. I thought Ryan killed it.
Cinematography was great too.
Beautifully shot. Beautiful 16. They shot Super 16.
Oh, did they really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they shot Super 16. Yeah, we were on set for 5 days, and they shot Super 16. And then as soon as they opened the hatch on the LEM, it was IMAX.
Okay.
So the whole time he was on the moon, it was in IMAX, and then it went back to Super 16.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Which is interesting. Yeah, you'll notice a pretty distinct shift.
Yeah, I got to watch that again then. Now that I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's incredible. I thought that film was just absolutely incredible.
So you guys shot the movie poster while they're in production at the same time?
Yeah, we shot second to the last day of production. Actually, we shot Ryan's last day. We shot his last day. Yeah.
What like going? Because like when I look at that photo, like how do you approach a shoot like that, like a movie poster? Like, is it a different approach than like an editorial shoot or?
Yeah, it is. First of all, they spend a lot of money on them. So it's really kind of fleshed out before you get there, right? A lot of times editorial shoots, I'm kind of like, I'll wing it. Pretty much every time I wing it. In terms of like what I want to walk away with. I just kind of let the day dictate itself, you know? But a thing like that was, there were a bunch of comps that were signed off on. And we looked at all of them. We had some meetings prior to. I had a meeting in LA at Universal, and then we talked, and then I talked to Ryan on the phone a couple times, and we talked about the comps back and forth. Did
they give you the script? Do you like or anything like that? So you'll read that
right away. Yeah, I read the script. And so the cool thing about First Man was that it was a single individual. We didn't shoot any of the cast. I would have loved to have shot Claire, to be honest with you, just because I think she's so fascinating looking and such a talented actress. But for this, all they wanted is Ryan on the poster. So we did a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff was really amazing, and it never got used. And they used that picture, in my opinion. There was another image of Ryan in the capsule that I preferred, that Ryan preferred, that Damien preferred, that Universal felt didn't pique people's interest as well. That poster, you haven't seen the film, correct?
I have.
You have. So that poster is not the film. That poster is like a superhero movie, in my opinion.
But they did another poster I saw with your launch shot.
Yeah.
I don't know what they used it for, but I saw it.
So they used that, and they also used a photograph of my Armstrong suit.
Okay.
Those were teasers.
Okay.
And that was one of those things where they said, "Hey, we pulled this off your website. Can we, And I was like, "Yeah, that would be awesome." So that kind of came from Ryan and Damien, to be honest with you, because I've known Ryan since he was 21, so he's 36 now, so a while. And I had given him. He called me when he got the part, and I kind of helped him a little bit, like talked to him about it and this and that. And I sent him a bunch of prints for like inspiration, like 11 by 14s, and so some of those. So him and Damien, I sent Damien and he both prints, and they had him up. Damien had him up in his production office, and Ryan had him framed and up in the house, and he was kind of living with them. And he, when it came time for the teaser, they're like, "Could we use that?" Yeah. So that was Ryan, really honestly, Ryan and Damien.
No, it was great. I like that one. And, I was just kind of curious with a shoot like that, when you shoot the poster, do you basically send that photo off and the studio kind of runs wild with the retouching, or do you still handle the retouching on everything, or how does that kind of work usually?
They handle everything in that one. Mm-hmm. We do, depending on what it is. We just did a big thing for Netflix that came out, and so this is interesting. It completely varies. So the Netflix thing was in London, and the creative director that was with us, Jenny Wilkes, amazing woman, she said, "Look, can we try to do everything in camera?" And I was like, "Cool, no, never asked for that."
Yeah.
And we were doing all kinds of cool stuff with prisms and stuff, and we did everything in camera, and we set the look on set, and that's what they went with. Like, there was no change. It was just like, we love what you did. We love how you shot it. That's how we're running it. And they ran it that way. And so there's this kind of, that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Most of the time, for movie posters, for entertainment stuff in general, you're never committing to an environment. It's usually always on gray seamless. So your lighting is key, but the environment you're never committing to. And then it's like dropped into an environment. Unless the kind of end game is really like fleshed out. I think what it is like the film's not even been edited yet.
They want
so
options.
They don't have an idea.
They want
they don't have an idea of even what is this thing. Like, we need to watch this thing in order to figure out what the poster is. Like, what's the appropriate like setting, this and that. So it's a lot safer, I think, for them.
Yeah.
To do it on. I mean, we just shot the poster for the new movie that Tom Hanks is doing, where he plays Mr. Rogers.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, he did like 2 weeks on it, I think, and then the main character did it for worked 2 months on it. So like he's not sort of the main character. He didn't follow the.
That's exciting because you photographed Fred Rogers. You think that's a big reason you got that job, pretty much because you have a famous photo of Fred Rogers that you shot in his
they
sweater.
knew I had shot it, and they wanted to have me be a part of the EPK, and they did an interview, and I brought the original camera I used and all that stuff, and we had that on set. But I guess the point I was trying to make is there were all these sets that we're on the stages, right? And there was like an amazing replication of Fred's office. And I mean, I went in there and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in, it was unbelievable.
Really?
Yeah. And oftentimes, you're on sets and they're amazing, but they're not actually replicating an actual location that I was ever in. So seeing like, for example, the stuff for First Man, like the LEM, or seeing like the capsule, it's mind blowing. But, and of course I would have loved to have shot Tom in the office, but they didn't want to commit to anything. So we shot him against Gray Seamless. So not nearly as exciting, but.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I guess to go back, like how did you kind of get into photography initially? How did it kind of come into your life?
It came into my life. Well, the first time I sort of like witnessed firsthand, like the photographic process outside of my parents, taking pictures of us as kids was I remember when I was a kid, this is kind of funny because I just thought of it, but there used to be these things called photo mats where you would like drive up to them. They're little kiosks, and they would be in like the parking lot of a Sears or something.
Oh yeah, I remember those
and
things.
You drive up to them and you'd give your film, you'd put it in an envelope and fill it out. And I remember we put it in there, and then you'd come back like a few days later and it was ready for you. And I remember being really fascinated by color negatives, because they look so odd. Like black and white negatives, you can kind of read, but color negatives, people's lips are like blue, and it was a weird
tint.
thing. Yeah. But yeah, when I was a kid, there was a local. I was in 4-H, which is 4-H is like an agricultural. It was run by the Department of Agriculture. It was founded in like 1911 or something, and it was like a project. It was it's an educational outreach program, right? So I studied in 4-H entomology and beekeeping and small engines and carpentry and cooking and all kinds of different subjects. But our photography instructor, Claire Dalrymple was his name. He was a Navy photographer, and he had a darkroom at his house. And I went in when I was about 9 or 8, probably. I was over there playing. His son was a good friend of mine, and we went into the darkroom and watched him print. And that smell, like every time I go in my darkroom, and I smell like glacial acetic acid, it's like, oh my God, I'm in Mr. Dalrymple's darkroom. So I saw that for the first time then. Didn't really kind of like revisit it until high school. One reason was because I was doing a lot of miniature work and building a lot of models and filming them and stuff. And it was one of those things where photography kind of came in sideways a little bit, because I was much more interested in like filming my miniature spaceships and stuff than I was like doing photography. But I realized that I needed to learn how to expose film, because I would like shoot a roll of Kodachrome 8mm film, have it processed, get it, and it was like super underexposed or way overexposed. I'm like, I got to learn how to expose film, because I'm waiting a week.
Yeah.
And I'm spending all this time like against this painted star field and stuff, and I'm not getting images. So it kind of came from that, because I wanted to be a cinematographer. That was like what I really wanted to be. That was like my dream. Like when I was in high school, I subscribed to American Cinematography and like, every kind of Starlog and Cinefex and like every magazine I could get that was like movie related, film related, special effects related. That was like my world,
Yeah, that's interesting. Now it's kind of come full circle. Like you were showing me, you're working on a movie right now, so it's kind of come full circle for you.
I mean, that part has. I mean, I've done videos and commercials for the last 25 years, but I do like working in film a lot, actually. The thing about film for me is it's interesting because it's an experiential medium. I at my house, every available wall has got art on it, right? So there's paintings and there's photographs and collages and whatever else, but a lot of photographs. And I live with those images, like the one behind you, for example. I like I know that image is there and I stop and I look at it, right? Film is different because film, you have to like commit to sitting down in a kind of darkened area and concentrating and having an experience. And then what we have from that is we have the kind of stored memory of that film. So you and I are talking about First Man, or we're talking about Apollo 11. We're talking about a memory we have of that. We don't have the movie sitting here with us, right?
Yeah, it's not tangible.
So it's a different thing. So for me, like creating like a tactile, tangible object, a photograph that you can live with in your house. There's something very special about that, and I think that's always my love. But
have you always been a collector? Because we're sitting here in your studio, and you just have tons of books, tons of photos, everything. Have you always just been like kind of like a collector of things, like growing up? Or?
Yeah, I think as soon as I had a place that had room, it kind of expanded, which that's pretty natural. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I have. I mean, I got it from my dad. He was a total pack rat.
Okay.
Like, his whole thing was like, he'd see something in a trash can when I was a kid. I remember this, and he'd be like, "Oh, I'll probably use that sometime," and he'd take it home, and there would just be junk everywhere. But the truth is, we can do entire jobs here without even going to Home Depot or anywhere. We got stuff. We just do it. So it works out pretty well that way.
What'd your dad do for a living growing up?
He was a welder.
Oh, cool. Was he pretty supportive of you getting into photography? What did he think?
Yeah, he was really interesting. The one thing we didn't have money, but the one thing that my parents did that I'm very grateful for, or one of the things that I'm grateful for, was that they tried to foster my interests. And I remember books were a big part of that. And, we had a library in town that my mom would religiously like take me to after school. Let me go in there. She'd run her errands. I'd sit in the library. I'd find books. I'd come out. You can get them. You get them for. I think the library was like you could check them out for 2 weeks. I think so. Like we'd go back. We also had a bookmobile, which I actually just saw that here in Austin. I just saw that we have a bookmobiles program in Austin. But basically, it's a big like delivery truck that's outfitted inside like a library.
And you just go on it,
and you go in and you check them out. So the bookmobile would park. I lived about a half mile from my bus stop, and we would have to walk to the bus stop and wait for the bus when I was a kid, and the bookmobile would park there every other week. So when we'd get dropped off by the bus, you could go right onto the bookmobile. And so one of my most salient memories from the bookmobile was like the American Heritage series, history series, and like Revolutionary War, Civil War, War, blah blah blah. They had one on the French Revolution. That's the first time I saw a picture of a guillotine, and it just totally mortified me. That's like, whenever I think of the bookmobile, I think of that day. The executioner like holding Marie Antoinette's head. It's just like, oh my God, I'm ruined.
Keep reading, kid.
Yeah, keep reading, kid.
No, it's exciting. I guess and then when did you think photography could be a career for you? Was it something you end up going studying it? When did you start thinking like, hey, this is how I'm going to make my living? When did that kind of...
Well, the interesting thing about choosing a career path, for example, is you really need to know that there's a career there to be had. And our like counselor at my high school, named Miss Spohr, Pat Spohr, she was as sweet as can be, but she had no idea like what was out there. I knew more about the film industry than probably anybody at my school because I subscribed to all those magazines, you know, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a special effects guy, No idea how to like facilitate that. So, my parents, literally, like my dad, like I started calling ILM obsessively, and finally they let me come there and look at all the stuff from Battlestar Galactica, and then I ended up working on it as a 17-year-old, which is like unbelievable. But like my dad took me down there, and I remember the one thing he did that was amazing was that he went with me, but he let it be my experience. Like he stood back, he let the conversation be between me and the people there. And ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, they do all the effects for Star Wars.
Yeah, I read about it in your book.
Yeah, so ILM. So they were in Van Nuys at the time. They're up in the Bay Area now at the Presidio. But it was like an incredible experience. So I think the photography thing, though, once again, like I started it and I got a little off track, but the idea that if you don't know that there's a career out there, it will only ever be like a pastime or a hobby, right? So I think my friend Tom, who is also into photography, he's like, man, I want to be a photojournalist. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. You know, what is that? And it was like the guy that takes the pictures in National Geographic, the guys that take the pictures in life. And I was like, man, I look at National Geographic all the time. I want to be the guy seeing it firsthand, not the guy looking at the magazine.
Yeah.
I want to be the guy that's there, you know? And so that was so appealing, you know, and I think that was kind of the driving force. Like, I want to be the guy that experiences it and brings it back to share it with people that aren't in the position to experience it, you know?
Yeah.
So that was about 2019, where I was like, I'm on, like it's on, you know? That's when I really like focused.
Mm-hmm. And did you end up going to school, or you just kind of all self-taught all along, or?
So I took a Photo 1A class at Moore Park College, which was a community college. I took a summer Photo 1A class. And the instructor there was named John Gray. He's still a close friend of mine. He's definitely my probably most profound influence and mentor. He taught Photo 1A because, and he taught a bunch of different classes, but he taught Photo 1A his entire career. He retired a couple years ago because he said that he loved seeing people fall in love with photography. And so Photo 1A for him was the one he loved, you know, because he loved photography so much. Yeah. So I took classes from him and really learned a lot from him. I got a job. I was framing houses, doing carpentry work while I was going to school at nights. And then I saved a ton of money, and then I applied to Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And I went there for almost 2 years, and I came back and started working in newspapers first as a lab tech, and then as a photographer. So that was around 85, 86, and then went to New York in 88.
Wow, how are those like newspaper years? You feel like you learned a lot? This kind of, because I've never worked in a newspaper, but I imagine back then it's probably like pretty fast paced. You're shooting all the time. What do you kind of take away from that experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you're very accurate. It's really quick turnaround. It's exciting. It was definitely like the most exciting, fun job I ever had. You know, I was like early 20s, single. I had a 62 Volkswagen Bug. I had like my photojournalist nerdy vest, 2 cameras, a scanner, you know, police scanner. And I just felt incredibly like free, you know, and I couldn't believe I was getting paid to like drive around and take pictures. It was amazing. And it was incredible. And it was a great learning experience. You know, I mean, it was like, you know, the idea of like, you know, I'd come in, depending on what shift I was on, I'd come in and I'd go right to my assignment basket in the photo department, pull my assignment slips out, read them, figure out like my day, sit down with the map, with the Thomas Guide map, plot my sort of like, okay, mark my the pages where I had to be, and you know, do my thing. And yeah, it was incredible. Come back, run your film, do contact sheets, you know, make your prints. I always made my own prints. Just, you know, yeah, it was kind of incredibly magical and wonderful. And I really feel fortunate that I got in right at kind of the last of the photochemical years, you know. And I don't lament. I would lament having missed that. I'm really happy I went through that, and I like learned how to use those tools really well, and spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in the darkroom. All of those things are important to me, but you know, digital is totally unbelievable, and you know, I don't miss film at all.
And like, did you kind of, because like looking at your work, you're really well known for like all the amazing stuff you've done in editorial. Obviously, you do more than that. But did you kind of have a goal early on, like, because you started off as a photojournalist, but did you have your sights set on being a magazine photographer, or how did that kind of come into play for you?
So the thing about that was, magazines, I think what it was is there were several things. One was Eugene Smith was a big influence on me, and I went to see an exhibition of his at the Contemporary Museum of Art in LA, and it was this massive exhibition, and it was all vintage prints, and Smith had already passed. It was a posthumous exhibition. And I remember John, my instructor at Moore Park, said, "You got to go see the Smith show." I actually ended up going with him to see it. And because he said, you know, in order to make a good print, you need to know what a good print looks like. And Smith was an incredible printer. So we went down to that show, And what I realized is, Smith was the consummate photojournalist, but he was a magazine photojournalist. So there was a lot of portraits. There was a lot of, so it seemed like this incredible, perfect blend, And I started going to magazine stands and looking at magazines and thinking, my work could live here. My work could live here. My work could live here. They're using the kind of work that, I feel like they'd respond to my work. And I just started kind of surgically targeting magazines. What really happened though, I was at the newspaper and I started lighting things, like multiple lighting setups. I was shooting 4x5 and medium format newspaper jobs, as well as 35. Obviously more of the news stuff was 35, but if I got a portrait to do a local artist or whatever, I would take lights and light it and stuff. So I was kind of like trying to hone my skills in that department. But I got a job in New York from Chris Callis, who is really, really amazingly talented, very technically talented photographer. And he was he was at the height of his career when I went to work for him, and I'd never even been on like a big commercial job before. I was like straight from the newspaper to working for him. I remember the first day I worked for him, it was like an American Express campaign, and it was like
producers,
all these lights. Yeah. Oh my God, so many people. And it was just like, I felt like a total like poser, imposter. But I remember he would have me, we were shooting Kodachrome, and he would do this motion blur stuff where he'd do mixed lighting. And so we would bracket, and I would stand there next to him and hold the camera lens and bracket while he was shooting. It was just amazing. It was amazing. It was just like, I don't even know what's going on here. But that kind of segued me into the magazine thing. I worked for Chris for a year in New York. So that kind of got me to New York.
Did you feel like that? Do you feel like that's like a necessity? Like, was moving to New York, do you feel like you needed to do that to get in the magazine world? Do you still think that people need to do that these days? What do you take away from that?
I didn't do it for anything other than the learning experience. I didn't think that Chris was going to like be my entree into anything, even though he was doing that work. It was like, this is the way I look at it. And I just actually told my son this the other day, as far as like getting breaks. I'd say, you get a break from a magazine once. If you don't deliver, you don't work for them again, period. Because, I think we look at these magazines, at these entities, and we don't break them down into their human components, So you get a call from, Karen Frank, for example. You interviewed her. Mm-hmm. Wonderful woman. You get a call from her, and she gives you an assignment. And maybe she hands it over to one of her sort of photo directors, right? Photo editors. And they sort of work through it with you. And then you turn it in. Not you particularly, but whoever. And, you get that image, you turn the image in. If the image falls short, right, it reflects poorly on the entire photo staff, because they have to go to the editorial staff, and then the editor sees it, and the managing editor sees it. And suddenly it's like, I better not hire that guy again, because like I didn't like the feeling of it.
I think if you did like 4 jobs for them and you messed up the 5th time, you're probably not going to go call again.
Yeah, so you really got to be mindful of that human element, right? It's like, I don't want to be the guy who's like not carrying my weight. Now, having said that, another thing that's very important, in my opinion, with regards to doing assignment photography is to have a kind of like safe place, have a go-to that no matter what, no matter if the walls of the building fall down, you can still go to a place. I would always have that contingency in my mind. And that's usually like a tighter shot, because if you're trying to get something to work and it's just not working, excuses don't like sell magazines,
No.
So it's a good point you made. No one likes bad photo days. I mean, I use a baseball analogy. You want to get on base at least, right? You want to have you really what you want is honestly what you want is a home run, but those are elusive and difficult.
Yeah.
You don't get those. Those aren't just like handed out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I've asked a couple of photographers this, like even at this point in your career, do you walk away from every shoot completely satisfied, or do you, obviously you get something that, like you say, you got your go-to things, but do you walk away from every shoot you do completely satisfied every time, you think, or is there ever a feeling of like, I should have tried this, or should have tried that, or?
I definitely like second guess my decisions sometimes, but I do know that usually I'm not on a time crunch. And if I am, it's very well thought through. And usually I don't stop until I feel like we're good. So I would say, I would say this, I haven't had that bad shoot feeling in a long time.
Yeah.
Like of just like, man, it just didn't work. Having said that, I mean, like I said, if you as a photographer can make a couple images in your career that add to or enrich the long history of the medium, you're doing pretty damn well. And let's face it, none of us are going to make, Behind the Gar at Saint Lazare 1932 Cartier-Bresson image, right?
No.
We're never going to make that image. We have to make peace with that. There are anomalies in our profession that are so masterful that it's probably just not going to happen. But what we can do is we can do the best we can and try to make a contribution. And I think if we're thinking that way, there's a really good chance we probably will. It's like knowing your history, I was I'm working with this young saxophonist, Ben Phlox, and we did a shoot, and we're doing his album design. We do design work here too, design. And I told him the other day, I said, I always want to make sure I know whose shoulders I'm standing on, because I know that there's a rich history in jazz, there's a rich history in photography, there's a rich history in sport. You need to know that stuff. You need to know where you come from. The first question I ask the audience when I speak is, when was the first photo made? I have the Niepce image up behind me as like my placeholder for the whole intro. And like while people are waiting for me to go out to the podium, it's just up there, right? It's the 1826 image of the courtyard. And so I stand up and I say, anybody know what this is behind me? And so a couple of people are like, first photograph, whatever. And then I say, does anybody know when it was made? And if you do, please don't blurt it out. And like, oh my God, like no one knows. Like when it's like, I don't know, 1720, like it's just, or like 1950, like really literally. I'm like, you got to know this stuff. You got to know the progression, man, because the progression is the important piece, But that's like a musician or that's like a painter, right? They know where they're coming from. You have to.
And I think it's smart because if you look at what's come before you, you can pull inspiration from that and like find new ideas from the past, and it kind of informs your work you're doing now. Do you feel like that sometimes? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100%. And for nothing else, just to sort of, just purely for the inspiration, purely for the discovery. Like, you look at Callahan's work from the 50s and, you look at that and or Metzger's work like from the 60s and 70s. And I look at it and it's like, are you guys aliens? Like, where on earth? How did you guys find this? And I'm so happy that they did, because it's almost like it's almost like Edison trying 1,000 different materials and finally landing on like tungsten.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, thanks. Got it. Now I can make a light bulb and I don't have to do 1,000. YouTube has been a great assistance in that, right? It's assisted us quite a bit in that, right? We can say, oh, how do I do this? And it comes up and you're like, done. I don't have to try it 50 ways.
There's videos of people like how to do the Dan Winters look.
Is that right?
100% on YouTube, man.
Wow.
I was gonna ask you that.
Wow. I did not know that.
Like you talked about in your book about style and things, but what do you say to do you feel like, did it take you a while to find your voice as a photographer? Is like style and aesthetic, is that something you think about a lot? Because like looking at your work, obviously when I look at your editorial stuff, looks like you shoot a lot of strobes. I know you use the ring flash, it seems quite a bit, but then your personal work is like a lot, really nice portraits of your father, like black and white Hasselblad. Did it take you a while to find your voice? Is it something you think about a lot, this the aesthetic? And
well, black and white Hasselblad is like my voice truly, because it's that's all that stuff, there's been a continuous 35-year stream of that stuff, right? Like I still shoot that way, and just available light, black and white, right? So the idea of that is, to me, like I tell young photographers, like, don't use a 50, just use a 50, because a 50 is the closest approximation to the way you see. If you really want to see, right, and learn how to see, use a 50, and like with a 35 format or a medium format, like use a normal focal length lens, like an 80. I use 100 on my Hasselblad because it's closer to a 50 than an 80. 80 is a little wide. because really it's all on you then. It's like the hardest thing is to like really see something, right? Build sets, you have wardrobe, you're using strobes, you're modifying everything, your lighting and all that stuff, which is wonderful. And it's a skill. And I mean, it's a learned skill, and it takes a long time to learn it, to do it really well, I think. You know, you're manipulating things. Whereas when you're just shooting like really simple black and white, kind of pure out and about, I call it like public photography, that's really difficult to do and make something that's really compelling. But as far as style goes and sensibility, you know, I mean, I like to use that term sensibility because I don't feel like you could, like, you know, you just said there's a thing of my style. Like, what is my style? Like, what do they say my style is?
When I think of it, like when I think of your editorial stuff, like I said, I think of like strobe, ring flash. You love like textured backgrounds, the Dan Winters green.
So you're talking about like the green portrait look?
Yeah.
Because I mean, look at Aerospace, look at these, look at like someone said not too long ago, they're like, dude, you should make an app. You could like sell your app. And I'm like, app for what? Like what, you go to NASA with my app and what, a shuttle appears or something? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about like that classic kind of like Rembrandt portrait like look would be like what a lot of people would probably like refer to as like a style. But if you looked on, you know, there's close to 1,000 pictures on my website, right?
Yeah,
and
no, 100%. Like
yeah.
everything, like your bee stuff, and yeah, it's just different. It's just in segments, and
right.
Like, I'm always just curious, like when you're with the editorial stuff. Seems a lot of times you use a lot of strobes, like I said, the ring flash and stuff. Is it you feel like with editorial and when you're working commercially, it's like you need to bring in like another? It's like it needs to be like on another level, high key, or what is the thought?
It depends, you know. I've really like I kind of stopped several years ago really using the ring light because the ring light in and of itself is incredibly ugly. I think when you augment it with and use it as a part of your contrast ratio, it's a great tool, and I use it for certain things. But I feel like you're not very flexible when you're shooting if you're using it. You know, you can't like move around. You got to keep like, you know, adjusting it over and over and over. And it's a good tool sometimes. I use it for the thing I use it for the most now is to get a little tiny specular highlight in the eye. You know, and I think it works well for that. But yeah, there was a time. I mean, I think the lighting. If I look at my work and I look back at my work and I look like, say, 25 years ago, let's say, for example, like I've known Karen longer than my son's been alive. I've known Karen 30 years, for example. So what I was shooting for her back then, I remember for the first job I got, this is a funny story, actually. The first job I got for GQ was to shoot John Thompson, who at the time was the basketball coach at Georgetown.
Yeah.
So I went down there to shoot it, and I went by myself, no assistant. I had 2 bags, Hasselblad, a couple little Norman lights, you know, really simple, really light. And I got to Georgetown and I closed the door of the car and I went and found my contact person who showed me like where I told them I wanted to shoot in a gym, on a court. They said, okay, no problem. So I went and met him. I was early, like 3 hours. You know, I usually just give myself a lot of time leading up to, because the more prepared you are, you know, the smoother it's going to go. Wow. And so I remember saying like, okay, this is going to work great. Let me go get my stuff. So I go back to the car and I'd lock the car and I'd lock the keys in the car. So I had no way to get in the car. So I threw a brick through the window and broke the window out to get to my stuff. So that was and I told her that. I was like, okay, so I had to blah, blah. Thank God I took the insurance.
By any way possible, Dan's getting the fucking job done.
I'm getting the job done. No question, yeah. So, but, you know, that picture, which I mean, obviously I never got rid of. I don't think I've probably thrown a couple negs away in my life, but not many. I keep everything. We keep every digital file, even the crap. We don't delete anything.
In your book, I found really interesting. You kept every note, because back in the day, you would drop off your portfolio at magazines, and if you said it, if the photo editor liked your work, a lot of times they'd leave you a note, and you kept every note.
Yeah, I have a giant pile of notes. In fact, they're in an envelope I saw 2 days ago that says many, 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 many thank yous. And that was the thing. I mean, it was a very different thing. Look, when I would shoot a job, I would send prints, which I still do. I still send prints. And not always, but we sent a batch of prints out yesterday for a thing I did for Boston medical center, I think.
Yep.
And then I would get like the magazine. They would send me a copy, right? And there would be a note, right?
Yep.
With the thing. And it was this very beautiful like exchange, you know?
Yeah.
I haven't gotten a note in so long.
Yeah, there's a couple magazines that still send me a copy, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, I get copies.
Yeah.
But every once in a while I'll get a note, like someone will put it in there. It always feels generic. Thanks. You know, like it doesn't even feel that personal thing is like really gone. Like for example, my phone at my studio used to like ring off the hook to the point where the guy, Dave Yeager, who works for me, who's worked for me for 26 years, he still works for me, I'm studio manager.
Yeah.
He has an office here in town.
Yep.
He was just on the phone all the time. Dan Winter's office, can you hold?
No, it's
you know, like
email.
crazy, all email.
Yeah.
All email. The phone never rings. It's like silent at there. I mean, I talked to him about it. He's like, it's silent.
I kind of hate that because I have that with some clients I work with, like some magazines, and I want to talk to them on the phone. And sometimes I'll try, and they just are busy, and it's all through email. And I think a lot of times having 10 emails, you could just take 1 5-minute phone call, and then it's just, I think it would just go way better.
You're right about it. You're absolutely right. Usually what I'll do is everything will get set up. And for example, okay, good example. I have a shoot on Wednesday of next week for Men's Health. And everything's been dialed in. It's all been set up. It's all been scheduled. And then I have my call this afternoon with the photo director.
Got it.
And then there's a quick call just to touch base. That usually happens like right at the end.
Mm-hmm. And it's smart. And, you know, was it like a gradual thing? Like, for you, like becoming a full-time photographer, because, you know, I think that's a lot of things young photographers struggle with. Were you able to make this your full-time job? Was it like, were you working, I know you're doing the assisting with Chris, and then you kind of break off on your own. Was it this straight to shooting, or how do you kind of make that transition to where you could actually make a living doing this?
Well, so my first job, like professional photography job, was as a lab tech.
Yeah.
And which is great because I was around photography. I would tell photographers, this doesn't apply anymore as much because this kind of stuff's gone away. But I used to tell students, like, when you graduate, don't drift away from the profession. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to school and studying photography, get a job at a lab, get a job assisting, a production job, a PA job, anything you can. You need to be in the profession because the more you're in the profession, the more you understand the way it works, all those things, right? Labs are obsolete almost now, right? So like the idea of getting a job at a lab is kind of gone out the window. But, you know, being in production and if you're in LA or New York, it's much easier to do that. Obviously in LA, I mean, there are so many assistant crews there that even when kids say, you know, I want to be an assistant, I'll say, okay, here, call this guy. He'll maybe work you in. But I want to warn you that you got to perform. And I'll tell students, you know, I'll tell kids, if you want to assist, you know, people will say like, yeah, I'd like to show you my portfolio. I'm like, why would I want to see your portfolio? I want to know that you can operate a pro photo pack. Yeah. That's all I care about on set. Like it's not about, you know, so, you know, most rental houses will let young assistants take a pack, plug it in with a head and play with it and figure out how it works. And, you know, it's the guys I work with, it's like, take it down a third. It's like done, like boom, right now, you know, and it's like, you know, this stuff really well.
Start with basics and
work your way up. And really what you want to do, the goal is you want to make yourself valuable on set so that someone says, wow, I need that person. You know, it's like, who's the most important person on a movie set? The AC, because he's focusing. And it's one of the hardest things to do. Yeah. So it's like, that's the guy you want to make sure your AC is like the man, right? I mean, I know Rick Linklater is a friend of mine. He's a director here. He does these, he's done these before sunset and after sunset. He's done a whole series of films with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delphi. And they're all Steadicam films, the whole thing. The whole thing is like walk and talk. Not the entire
thing. Boyhood was
I shot that here. Yeah. Eller's from right here up in Wimberley, the kid that played him. Amazing. So there's a Steadicam operator, this guy from Greece. And it's like the only Steadicam guy like Rick will work with.
He's just the guy.
He literally has moved production around this guy. Like, oh, you're not available till March 3rd. Okay, we'll wait till, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, that is a huge piece, you know. I mean, that's a walk and talk movie. Yeah, you got to have that. But in terms of like making it a career, for me, it was like lab tech, photojournalist. So I'm shooting every day. So I was like really sharp, like really sharp. And the entire time I worked for Chris, I was shooting all the time too, for myself on the street. And the transition was, I told Chris I'd work for him for a year, and I gave him exactly a year, almost to the day. And 3 months before my year was up, I said, okay, I got to replace myself. I'm just telling you right now, like my year's up in 3 months or 2 months or whatever. Yeah. He's like, oh, you're really going to do it, huh? And I'm like, yeah, I want to shoot. You know, I want to be back shooting, you know? And so what happened was I took a month off. I printed a portfolio. I had a box made. I still have the box here. It's completely trashed, but I had a custom box made, had full of prints, and I was ready. And I had been looking at the magazine stands, and I'd picked magazines I wanted to work for. And I literally, like, the Metropolis magazine was the first one I went to. And I rode my bike over there, and I dropped off my portfolio. And there was this Cuban restaurant. It's when I lived in Tribeca. And there was this Cuban restaurant on Canal that I used to love to go to, get a big plate of beans and rice, and like, so good. Anyway, so I went there, and I had lunch, and then I rode my bike back to my place. I shared a loft with a friend of mine when Tribeca was like dirt cheap. Yeah. And there was a light flashing on my machine, and I had got 2 assignments from Metropolis. Damn. And I was like,
I made it.
No, I was like, wow, this is so easy, you know? And I mean, the story goes like, you know, I've kind of been working ever since, you know?
And, you know, one thing I was kind of curious, like people's mindset, like what do you remember about your mindset as a young photographer back then? Like, did you always envision yourself being a successful photographer? Did you ever have times of doubting yourself, or did you always just have that confidence in yourself, like you were going to succeed? What do you remember about your mindset early on?
I remember being probably like painfully naive and incredibly confident, maybe like unrealistically confident. And I do remember one kind of thing, and I've talked about this before, and that is the idea of like, you know, the idea of like making it, quote unquote, right? So that's like a thing that I think we fabricate, like, because what we do when we make it is we kind of create a goal. And then when we achieve that goal, then the perception is that we've made it. But the reality is all we've done is like achieved a goal. Yep. That's not making it. So I had this idea in my head, like, oh, if I get a Rolling Stone cover, I will have made it. Yep. And, you know, I got my first Rolling Stone cover and I shot it. And then the next day it was like, okay, what am I doing today?
I need another job.
There was no, yeah. And so like I've completely erased that part. Like for me, it's just like what's going on tomorrow, what's going on the next day, and just trying as hard as I can. I think the one thing that helped me always was I had an incredible work ethic. I mean, I got that from my dad for sure. And my mom, they both were super hard workers. And the idea that every single time I try as hard as I can to do something to make a compelling image and to satisfy the client, but satisfy the client while being true to myself, because I feel like that's the most authentic way to work, is like creating something that is like you're being true to yourself, right? Not second guessing yourself, not sort of like, you know, I hear this so much. I see a portfolio and it's like, you know, there's some compelling, cool pictures in it, and then there'll be like a plate of food. And I'm like, in color, you know, and I go like, what's this? And they're like, oh yeah, I just want to show people that I can shoot like color or still life. And I'm like, ditch that, man, because that is not a good image. You want to only show what you want to shoot. You don't want to show something you don't want to do. So like the portfolio, now that's not to say, like we talked about earlier, like my body of work is really diverse. Yep. But if I were going to show my body of work in a portfolio, I would definitely do it in sections. I would very consciously like delineate sections. Exactly. So I could say, here's this section. That's not going to confuse someone. They're going to be like, oh, wow, this guy's really, okay. And the response you want is, this guy's really diverse versus this guy's all over the place. Yeah. So that's the response you want to. So how do you control that? How do you create that response? You create that response by showing complete thoughts, multiple complete thoughts.
I think that's like the tough thing, because like when you start off in photography, it's your love of photography and taking pictures, but then at some point you're trying to make money. So I think I've made the mistake early on, is you're trying to make money, so you start trying to put these photos. You're like, maybe this person will hire me for this, but then the thing I was going to ask you is like, has money ever kind of clouded your creativity or vision, or have you always just been able to like be like, this is who I am, and I'm not going to try to like cater to these clients and hope they're going to hire me? Or is it you've always just kind of had that vision, you're just going to put it out there and hope they respond to it?
Well, I think if I get hired, right, so they want me to do my thing. That's how I've always felt. So if you're hiring me, I'm going to do my thing. I have been in situations before where I have been doing my thing, and then sort of they've asked me to like do something else, probably something I wouldn't have done normally. And so in that case, what I do is so I'm really good at like kind of being egoless on shoots. So I can go like, okay, I can switch gears. And what I can say is I have a skill set that will allow me to make a living, and if they want me to do it this way, I'm going to put on my craftsman hat and take off my like artiste hat.
Yep.
And I'm going to because I know that these people, once again, I have to honor this. They're answering to other people, right? They've been working on this for a long time, and I'm a very small piece in a very big project, right? I mean, the amount of meetings and pitches and client meetings and this and that and this and that, and then photographer selection, and then I do my little piece here, and then they keep going with like production, layout, design, release, printing, blah, blah, blah. So I understand that like I'm a small part of a big process.
Yeah.
And if they really feel like they need it this way or that way, now I'm not saying that I would be okay with them saying like, here, make a really crappy image.
Yep.
I'm still going to do the best I can. But if I'm starting with like a really cool set and thinking like this is the way to go, and what it turns into is like, can you just shoot it against white? I'm like, I can shoot all day long against white, you know, and I know how to do it right. I know how to get the person silhouetted and put the light on it, and I'll just be a craftsman today. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, because I would imagine a lot of times these art directors, when we're talking about like commercial side of things, a lot of these art directors are probably fans of like your personal work, your B stuff, and that's why they want to work with you because they respect what you do. But then there's the corporate bureaucracy of like the people that are hiring you at like whatever, Bank of America, whatever it may be.
Universal, whatever, yeah.
That guy doesn't know anything about photography, but he's still in charge of like all this marketing stuff and that. But so they just want you to execute that. So it's like your personal work kind of gets you in the door, and then they ask you to execute this, whatever their vision might be.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty spot on. I think the probably the most kind of obvious example of that comes to mind would be movie poster stuff, where usually what happens with movie posters for me is like they want me to set up like a really classic portrait setup, like something I would want to do. Like, can you bring a background and do this and do that? So we have that, and then we shoot portraits, right, of each of the cast members, which is great for me because then I get like awesome portraits of actors that I love. And then what we do is shoot the rest on gray, which I'm happy to shoot on gray. I can do that. I can light, make it beautiful. And it's not that it's not beautiful. It's just that it's like a gray shot, and I normally probably wouldn't kind of come up with that as my option. But that speaks to what we talked about earlier, which is the idea that like, hey man, we don't even know what we're doing with this stuff yet. And when you're doing movie posters, you're doing it during production. You're not getting the people back.
Yeah.
It's always during production.
Yeah.
Usually what they try to do is they try to do it on the last day of production. So for example, First Man was Ryan's last day.
Yeah.
So the last thing Ryan did on that film was my photo shoot.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting stuff. It's always kind of interesting how that all comes together. And, I was kind of curious, like, is it always your goal to shoot celebrities, or that's just something that kind of happened organically? Like,
totally organically, it happened. It's, I guess if I could think of any, like, and I want to use the word break very sparingly, but if I could think of, an example of like the photo gods shining on me, it would be when Kathy Ryan at the New York Times Magazine assigned me to shoot Denzel Washington. Because prior to that, I had shot a couple actors that were, really solid actors. But at that time, Denzel that was kind of like it was a big time for him. It was for X.
Okay.
And it was one of those times, time and place, and she assigned me that. And I remember, there's a saying with automotive racing, race on Sunday, buy on Monday. So the idea is like, Chevrolet, Ford, it was when the big three were really competing with one another. And like, the Plymouth powered car would win the Talladega 500, and like Plymouth muscle car sales would go through the roof on Monday. That's kind of a joke. But, you know, the thing with the New York Times thing was it came out on Sunday and the phone rang off the hook on Monday.
Damn.
And it was like that. But it was a seized opportunity, right? So it was an opportunity that came to me, and I really like allowed it to manifest. I worked hard to make sure it was something memorable, but I never really did. I didn't really. I was really into just like street photography, and it was really into scientists.
Yeah.
That's what I liked shooting. You know, I'd been shooting scientists. I'd shot some musicians. I shot like, you know, a couple sports people. Always portraits. You know, business stuff. You know, which I've never really been that into. And then that happened with Denzel, and you know, that kind of changed things for me. And I enjoy actors. I enjoy working with artists.
Yeah.
So I like painters, actors, writers, whatever. I like them because they're interested and knowledgeable about the creative process, and they have a respect for it, right? They have the respect. Like politicians, no respect whatsoever for the creative process. It's like, you got 3 minutes, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a fake smile, right? It's like they're not interested in talking to you about, like, you know, Rothko and Liechtenstein and, like, you know, Winogrand versus Friedlander, like none of that stuff, you know, at all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are cool. I mean, Obama's a cool politician. I've worked with him a couple times, and he was actually really cool. But for the most part, it's like, what do you need, kind of thing.
Do you feel like do you feel like having celebrities in your book has opened doors to commercial work? Because do you feel like people react to it? They're like, wow, does it give it like a validity to it, or for some reason, or what do you think? Because
I think, you know, sadly, I think, you know, I think there are photo editors that are visionaries, and they're not swayed by sort of like, they can see the potential in a portfolio, even if there's not a celebrity in there, and they can hire someone and say, this guy makes amazing portraits, insert celebrity here. I felt like Kathy did that with me. You know, she did that with the Denzel thing. I'm like, I had no A-list guys in my book at all, and I was like shocked, you know, when I got that assignment.
yeah,
And, but I do think, well, okay, so to get, like, you know, entertainment work, yeah, it's huge, because they know that you can shoot actors, and you know how to light, and you know how to make people look good, and this and that and the other thing. And also, sadly, I think what happens is, you know, if we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of the cult of celebrity, the idea that, you know, our attention is kind of misguided, you know, I mean, the idea that, like, someone like, you know, the Kardashians or something would have as much currency in social media as they do seems ludicrous to me. You know, it's like famous for being famous kind of thing. Excuse me. But I do think that when I post a picture on Instagram, for example, I'll give you an Instagram. I've been reduced to giving Instagram examples. When I post a picture on Instagram, which I actually got Instagram a couple years ago, because I was a contract photographer for Wired, and basically the creative director and the editor both said, you have to get Instagram. They're like, dude, you got to get Instagram, man. That way you can post the stuff you shoot for us. Like, it wasn't like you got to get it, but you should get Instagram. I was like, okay, I got it. So for a year, I never even did anything. Travis did everything. I would write a caption and email it to him and say, put this picture up.
Yeah.
And then I just started doing it myself.
Okay.
But, cause I enjoy it. But the, if I put up a picture of some street photograph that I think is like the most beautiful thing, and like meticulously, like, I just posted one of the most beautiful photos I've taken in a while in Kazakhstan. And for me personally, it's like one of the most beautiful photos I've taken in a while. And I put it up there, and I was just like, I'm so proud of this image, you know. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to like focus on a bird while it's in flight, you know, and moving. And I'm like, it's hard as hell to do this. Like, and people don't, you know, you don't necessarily want the merit of the image to be like, it was really hard to make this, and therefore you should like it. Yeah. But it's a beautiful image, I think, and it was difficult to make. If I put that up there, I know right off the bat, it's not going to get like anywhere near if I put a picture of like Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, how's your engagement, Dan?
Oh, dude, it'll get like 7,000 likes, and the bird will get like under 1,000.
It is weird. It's like almost it's like a currency, like you said.
Totally.
It's weird. But yeah, I was interested in talking about that. You cool going a little longer? We got a couple more.
Oh yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's really interesting. And you mentioned you shot Obama, and I thought it was interesting. On your site, you photographed him in 2008, and then you shot him in 2016. And I was curious, was that planned that far in advance? Like, we're gonna shoot him. This kind of happened.
Yeah, when I got the assignment to shoot him in 2016, it was like, okay, we got to replicate the 2008 picture, and that was one of the pictures we're going to do. It was funny too because I said, "Oh, that was that time cover I shot of you. I'm going to replicate that." And he was like, "Oh no," it's really funny because he knew he aged as well, and we had the picture on set.
I think he lost a little weight.
Yeah, he got thinner.
Yeah,
much more gaunt. Yeah. Definitely much more gaunt. But yeah, that was a great shoot, actually.
Yeah, what was your experience working with him? Like you were kind of talking about politicians. Most people, it sounds like they don't really give a shit. But what was your experience working with him?
Well, I think what we're getting is we're starting to get finally like rid of like the old white man politician. The old white man, right? And I think now we got
Buttigieg. What Buttigieg? I can't say his name. Buttigieg or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting people in there that are like people that are like my generation. They grew up listening to like Zeppelin, and they grew up like we're not stuck in that paradigm that existed forever. Like for many, many, many years. The old white man's club, and so hanging out with him is like put on some Jay-Z. Like he's like cool. Like he's like a cool guy that's easy to be with. So it's not like being with a politician.
Yeah. What having photographed a good amount of politicians, like what do you take away from it? Like sometimes like. Do these people care? Like, I can't ever tell. Like,
no, I think politicians live in perpetual fear of not getting reelected, and so what they do is they just do what the constituents want, so that they'll get elected again. I think they're absolutely the majority. I think are absolutely disgusting.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of people that have a good ethical. I was talking to someone the other day actually, and I was like, okay, so do you think like Mitch McConnell thinks that he's serving the country's best interests? Because I find it interesting.
Oh, he definitely does. He does. Yeah, for sure.
So I find it the same, the conversation about like any conviction anyone has, right? The conviction of this or that, like beliefs or faiths or whatever, like your faith or whatever. So like, they really believe that. So in a way, like it's hard to fault that, like I disagree with, all of it, right? Mm-hmm. But if we feel like he's coming to it from a place of integrity, we should at least be able to have a dialogue about it, right? Rather than a place of passion, right? Yeah. But I think most of these guys are like, I think all of them are afraid of Trump. We don't want to get into politics here. I mean, I don't mind.
Yeah,
I'll go there.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that like they seem like they're all like mortified of this guy because their constituency loves him.
Well, you read about like I was listening to some interview with some like Harvard like political professor or something, and he explained how the actual system works. And basically, once he's got from the jump, like from when they start their campaign to when they get in office, just raising funds, and that's literally the job.
Yeah, that's the job.
Yeah, it's crazy. And have you ever felt? Have you ever not wanted to photograph someone because you didn't believe in what they were about? Because I know I had this situation, I've mentioned it before in the podcast earlier this year, where I photographed Sean Spicer, and I felt like kind of conflicted about it. Like on one hand, I'm like, I'm a photographer, maybe that's not my job to put like my politics in it. But have you ever had an experience where you didn't want to take a shoot or turned it down, or how do you kind of approach those?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten pretty good at like articulating and framing what you're addressing right now, and that's a really good point, and I don't think anybody's ever actually even brought that up in a podcast before. So thank you for that question. The way I look at it is I look at my time as being valuable, and I look at I don't want this to come off being like pompous or like based in any kind of ego, but I look at my artistic ability to be valuable to myself, and do I want to spend my time and my artistic ability highlighting this individual, right? I know that someone's going to do it if I don't, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And then am I going to get compensated? So if I was assigned to shoot Sean Spicer, I would have said no, because I don't want to leave my wife and my son.
Yep.
Now, if you said you're going to pay me $100,000 to shoot Sean Spicer, I would say I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much, because using Sean Spicer as a vehicle to the amount of freedom that $100,000 gives me, I can justify.
Yeah.
And I don't look at that as whoring. I look at that as like, I have to analyze this for how I am benefited, right?
Yeah.
Trump, I would absolutely flat out turn down. I wouldn't photograph him. I wouldn't give him any of my time or any of my artistic ability. I would just say, no, he's not worth that.
Yeah.
I didn't photograph Bush twice when he was in office. Time offered me a cover when he was elected. I turned it down.
Yeah.
And one other time during his tenure, I was offered a shoot with him, and I turned it down. And
he's an interesting one, because out of office now he's become this like new character where people like love him.
Yeah.
Whereas like 10 years ago they fucking hated him.
Yeah, it's true. So when he was out of office, I got an offer to shoot him again, and I didn't want to do it. And my wife, bless her heart, my wife said, "Look, you've been objectifying this guy, like his entire, since he was governor of Texas. Like you need to like humanize this guy. So you should go and see what it's like and just do it." And I was like, all right, fuck it. So I went. So we went to the ranch, and we had the best day.
Really?
So much fun. It was the funniest, weirdest thing that we still joke around here. We started shooting, and I bet I shot for like maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and we were tweaking something. And he just looked at me, and he kind of pointed his finger at me, and he goes, "Dan Winters, you're a great American." And I just thought it was hilarious. So anyway, and then we shot, and then he's like, "Let's get a group shot," and this and that. And you are right. Like, we have short memories. I think what's happened now with Bush is that he seemed like this consummate villain. And then we have this psychopath, egomaniac, maniacal, lying, manipulating, just disgusting, everything bad about humanity. But, we need to have him, though. He is a reflection of where we are as a society, this guy. Yeah. So we're seeing the part of ourselves we don't like. It'll change. It'll pass. We'll be okay. I believe we'll be okay.
It's wild, man, because I live in Massachusetts, which is like primarily Democrat.
Sure.
But I was born in Minnesota, and like a lot of my relatives live there, and I don't really talk to them. Like I don't really have much of a relationship with them, just because I never lived there. I was born there, and my parents moved out, but my relatives still live there. But they're Trump people, man, and I try to talk to them about it, and it's like I'm like what? Like I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of live in a bubble living in Boston where everyone for the most part they don't back Trump, but then there's this large population. I mean, you live in Texas.
Yeah.
It's
See, what it is for me though is it's like people have suspended their like moral code to support this guy that is completely amoral.
Yeah.
And the problem with politics in this country is that we view it as like football. It's like us or them. We won, they won.
Yeah.
This is far beyond politics. If there was a decent human being that was a conscientious human being that was a Republican in office, I would have total respect for that person. Yeah. I really would have respect for that person because he's a decent person.
Yeah.
He has the interests of the country in his mind. This is not political.
Just the shit he did with McCain like a couple weeks ago was crazy.
This is a disgusting, deplorable individual.
Yeah.
And if you support this disgusting, deplorable individual, either you're reaping the benefits of one of his policies, so you're allowing yourself to operate outside your moral code, or you're a fucking disgusting, deplorable individual. One of the two. I don't know. I mean, he is given the fucking go-ahead for ugliness to rear its head in our society.
Yeah, and I don't like that. Like it brings even I find myself like come on Twitter and I don't respond, but like I have these like feelings where I want to, but I don't even want to have that emotion. But he like brings it out of people that hate, and it's like I don't want to have that dialogue with people. But like I'm saying, like even with my relatives, like I don't want to hate them because I still love them at the end of the day. Morales, I may not agree with them, but it's like he almost like brings the hate out of people. It's weird, man.
Yeah, I've noticed. Actually, it's funny. This is like I've noticed that if I indicate, and there are certain things that I would say that there are certain things. If I were to take the test that they have, I would definitely like be a libertarian. That's how I think I would test.
Yeah.
I tend to be incredibly open-hearted when it comes to like the impoverished.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we can't judge people's circumstances and how they arrive there. And yeah, there are going to be people that take advantage of that, but that's just human nature.
Yeah.
I'm not going to like generalize an entire sort of population because, one bad apple or several bad apples.
Yeah.
I think that this country was built on immigration, and I think the wall is like preposterous, whatever. I mean, I could go.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I could go like, policy by policy by policy. But I think what it comes down to though is really honestly, like I felt like Obama was a decent human being.
Yeah.
Like I felt like he was a really decent human being. Was there a policy that was fakakta? Yeah. Did he fuck up? Yeah. Did he lie? Yeah. I mean, he did.
It's just, it's like not to give him excuses, but it's like the way the system's built. You almost can't get around it.
Yeah.
It's
and I'm saying when I say lie, I would use, I saw a list of like presidents all the way back to like, since it's been charted by the Washington Post with regards to like, dishonesty and deceit in presidents, and they ranged it from like big fat lie to white lie to misconstruing truth, blah blah blah, all the way down the line. And so like there was Obama and Bush and all of them. There were a couple like of all of them that were like just fucking white, literal lies. Literally,
they're alternative facts.
Yeah, they're alternative facts. No, but Trump's was so far off the charts that it was like it was funny. But and I hate for it to be. I feel like it's not a political thing. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. I mean, I mean, it's about like where do we stand with regards to like morals, and he's an amoral individual, period, and there are a lot of moral people that are supporting him, and it confuses me.
I think from talking to my cousins who are like, they're racist, and the thing about racists is, in my mind, is that they live in a bubble and they don't talk to other people, so they think anything that's different from them is like an attack on them.
Oh sure, they're afraid. It's fear.
Where it's like if you actually just like, people have the same problems in life pretty much.
Everyone struggles.
Making enough money to live, finding someone that's gonna love you, having a family, and that's everybody's problem around the world, no matter where you're at.
Yeah. You're absolutely right about that. I had that realization later in life, I think, but that's really awesome that you have that realization, and the idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter if you're a part of the royal family or if you're part of a tiny little village in India, we all struggle. We all struggle, and life is a struggle. And it's like, at the end of the day, people are just trying to get through their day, But I think, we have to sort of like keep in mind that we are also a part of a much bigger thing, each of us. Yeah. And that bigger thing is like the bigger expression of our consciousness as a society. So right now we're like the laughing stock of the planet, not the entire planet, because there are certain factions that love us.
Yeah.
Still that love Trump, mostly fascist dictatorships. But anyway.
Yeah. And then I guess being a photographer, you've photographed so many different types of people. I guess we kind of already talked about. What do you think you've learned most about maybe yourself or just people in general being a photographer and coming in contact with so many people, you think?
I think the thing I've learned the most probably is the idea that we're all human.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all flawed. We're all fallible. We all have bad days. We all have good days. We struggle. We need to connect. And I think that transcends, photography. At a shoot, the key is we need to connect. We're all here. We have the same mission. We all need to like connect. I have a crew here that's helping me to connect and helping me to make these pictures. I need to stay connected to them. It's all about like connecting on a human level, no matter who you're shooting. I mean, I shot the Dalai Lama, and he we didn't speak hardly any English at all together.
Yeah.
But it was a phenomenal shoot.
Yeah.
And he ended up like playing with the camera and trying to figure out how the lens worked on the 4x5 and stuff. So, the funny story, I shot, you know who Yoshitomo Nara is? Nara, he's a Japanese painter. Mm-mm. Murakami and Nara, they're all kind of part of that super flat movement.
Yep.
I shot Nara at a studio in Tokyo, and we went, and I knew one thing. I knew that he had done a 1-year sabbatical in Switzerland and in Vienna. No, in Austria. It was in Austria. And, or maybe it was in Switzerland, Lucerne. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, so I was like, he's got to speak German. And I went to his film school in Germany, and I speak no Japanese. And I had a translator, but I was like, I hate talking through translators. Yeah, so I got there and I was like, kannst du Deutsch? And he was like, ja, freilich, you know. So here I am in Japan shooting a Japanese artist, and we're speaking German, and that's how we can communicate, you know. So then it was like I was engaged with the guy the whole time. Now, had I not spoken German, I would have been talking through a translator the entire time. Damn. Which never is great, you know.
How do you, and like off that, like how do you kind of deal with tough personalities, or even like one shoot you did, you wrote about it in your book, you photographed a firefighter, I think, was it Brendan McDonald?
Yeah.
What was that?
Donut.
Yeah. Which was like such a tense article. It was, I believe, 19 firefighters lost their lives. Mm-hmm. One guy survived. You photographed him. With a shoot like that, are you going into that? Are you nervous going into that? How do you deal with such like a touchy subject with that?
So on something like that, and oftentimes what I do, it's a joke with the guys actually, because usually like if we're doing something like that where we go to someone's house and we meet up, I met up with them at the fire station in that case. And we met up, and my guys think it's really funny because I just sit and talk for like an hour and a half.
Before you even start shooting.
Don't even break the stuff out. I don't even know where we're going to be shooting, because we ended up going to the site of a fire. That's where that shoot was done. And so I'll just talk, and he told me the whole story, you know, and it's cathartic for him. Yeah. I mean, the telling of a story is healing. Yeah. So that was another telling for him.
Because how long after that happened did you photograph him?
It was relatively soon.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. Chris wrote that story, like, trying to think. It was relatively soon after. And then a good friend of mine produced the film that they made about the hot shots. And Brendan was a technical advisor on that. Yeah. Donut's what they call him. Donut, his name. Yeah. Donut. Everybody calls him Donut.
That seemed like pretty intense. And you know, one shoot in particular, a couple more questions, I'll let you go. You photographed Tupac. Mm-hmm. What was your experience photographing him like? That guy's just such like a legendary.
I know. Yeah, he was. It's amazing. It was relatively. You know, his legendary status has grown over the years. I've seen it grow. You know, I mean, partially like he was deprived of his life very prematurely. You know, secondly, he's an incredible artist, incredible hip hop artist, and incredible artist in general. He was an advocate for, black rights. His mom was a Black Panther. You know, he had a very kind of interesting background. He was really intelligent, which I think scares white people when black people are smart. Scares those folks in Minnesota anyway, right?
Fucked up.
So it was great. He came to my studio alone in Hollywood. I had a studio up in the Hollywood Hills on Whitley Heights, right across from the Hollywood Bowl. It was an old ballroom of a house that was built by Hearst for his mistress, Marion Davies. And there was upstairs, and my friend Chloe and Beth lived upstairs, and I had the whole downstairs. I had a dark room, and it was a huge house. So I had the ballroom. So it was a very atypical studio. It was totally rad. And so we'd shoot in the ballroom, and I had a couple sets that I'd built, and he showed up. And the thing that was interesting to me about that experience with Tupac is it really reinforced the idea that we have to, as artists, like look outside of our own genre in order to bring something back into our genre, because like he wanted to listen to the Counting Crows.
Oh, wow.
Which was like, at the time, that record, August and Everything After, I guess it's called. It's a phenomenal record. And it had just sort of dropped, and he was like, "Hey man, do you got Counting Crows?" And I said, "Yeah, I have it." So,
and that's CD days.
CDs. We're still in CDs here. We're still in CD mode here. Yeah,
we'll get you a Spotify account.
I do not have a Spotify account. So I was like, "Yeah, I have it."
Nah.
And so we put it on and we listened to it all the way through while we're shooting. And then he said, hey, could we listen to it again? I said, yeah, we played it again. And then he said, hey, could we listen to it again? We played it again. Wow. So the shoot was roughly 2.5 hours then.
Oh, damn. So he's like pretty good collaboration with him.
Oh, yeah. Great. Yeah. That's the one thing I always try to make sure I have a lot of time, unless it's like someone like Obama where you're like, you get 10 minutes. It's like no one gets any time.
No.
And I get it. And I respect that. I don't want my fucking president sitting around.
He's got real shit
doing
to do.
Photo shoots. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, they gave us so much time. I mean, I flew to the White House in advance, figured out where I wanted to shoot. They gave me a whole thing. You could shoot here, you could shoot here, you could shoot here. I flew there like 2 weeks before.
The shot of him looking out the window, that's set up, right? Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just, I had a mark.
Yeah.
Stand here and look out the window.
That's what I figured. I wasn't sure if like maybe you were like doing repertoire the rest of the day. Around. Like Pete Souza or something. I don't know.
Pete actually, it's funny. When I was shooting that picture, Pete was like over here and he stole that picture.
Oh, really?
But at a side angle. Like, in other words, I saw it and I'm like, that's when I had him looking out the fucking window.
What the hell, Pete, man?
Yeah, whatever.
And
he photo bombed it or whatever you would call it.
I forgot the name is. Whatever. No, it's interesting. And one thing I was kind of curious about, being a successful photographer, you get a lot of attention. Do you ever get sick of having to like promote yourself and talk about your work sometimes? Because I know myself, like photography sometimes can feel like, I don't know if this makes sense, it can feel like kind of a selfish career at times, because it's all about, look at my work, look at my website, look at me, look at me. Do you ever get sick of having to like talk about and promote your work?
I mean, I feel like this conversation has been pretty back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really interesting to me to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Like, I think earlier I said I really like doing this. I really like speaking because I like the Q&A.
Yeah.
Because I like a dialogue.
For sure.
And I mean, I feel like if I have anything to offer at 57 years old, having done this for 35 years or more, that I can offer, like, I've had all these experiences and I can share those, and maybe those are of value. I like to think that I've made a few successful images in my day, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
I feel like if I viewed myself as anything, it would be more like someone that understands the history and the craft and understands the medium very well. And I know technical stuff really, really well. Mm-hmm. And I've spent a lot of time learning that stuff. Yeah. So, talking about yourself sometimes can feel kind of, I hate to use the word, I don't know, dirty. When you talk about yourself for a while, you feel like,
I think it's just like approach. We were talking before this interview. It's just how, I think it's just having the self-awareness. And like the thing I really liked about your book, Road to Seeing, is you gave useful advice. It wasn't this book about like how I shot X, Y, and Z celebrity and how awesome I am. It was like you actually gave valuable content that people could actually use. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I kind of really enjoyed how you kind of approached it.
Yeah, and I would hope that, through our conversation, you would be getting that stuff too. The idea of like, what's a career look like? Well, it looks like when you're 9, you do this, and then when you're, it's a progression, right? And then you look back, I mean, I remember seeing Bruce Davidson speak. I drove in my Volkswagen. I drove all the way up to San Francisco from LA to see Bruce Davidson speak at SFU, and my bug got stolen. My Volkswagen got stolen. I got it back 6 weeks later, stripped. Wow. But I went back up and got it. And I remember seeing him speak and thinking, oh my God, why am I even trying to do this? Like, oh my God. But, he'd been at it forever,
Yeah.
Had been at it forever. And I had like 4 binders of negatives at the time. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm like a baby. But so you could either view that as in a defeatist way, right? Or you could view that in an inspirational way and say like, look what exists. How can I add to that?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, no one, self-promotion and stuff like that. I mean, basically, if you looked at self-promotion just as I want to try to make people aware of my work rather than aware of me, because ultimately they're hiring you to do your work.
Yeah, so. That's what I think, man. This coming to the studio is just inspiring. Like, it's just, you love photography so much. Like you can come through like the history and everything, the old cameras, the old photos, and you can tell it's a lifestyle pretty much. It's every day, all day.
Every day, all day. Yeah.
I respect it, man. Yeah. And I guess my last question: what advice would you give to younger photographers out there that want to be doing this for a living? What do you think they should be doing these days in an age where the digital age where everyone has a camera and everyone's a photographer these days? How do you set yourself apart and push through, I guess you think?
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I've had this thought on my mind for a while about, you know, what distinguishing factor you could sort of apply to your work to stand out in today's like oversaturated market. And what I think this is what I've come up with. What I've come up with is that with a phone or with a DSLR that has auto settings on it and you get immediate feedback, what you get is you get a focused, an image that's sharp, right? An image that's in focus, and you get an image that's properly exposed. So after that, it's image making. So either you can make images or you can't. So when people used to go to photography school back in the day, let's say the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, what they were studying is the technical aspects, because you had to be a technician. So when I was coming up, you had to know chemistry, sensitivity, sensitometry. You had to understand optics. You had to understand how the thing worked, right? Because you were using those tools and they were complicated, right? All that's gone. All of that's gone. So I joke about, like, I have this skill in the darkroom. I have a skill with a 4x5 camera that I've had for many, many years, skill in the darkroom. And my darkroom skills, like the fact that I've spent thousands and thousands of hours printing and I can make beautiful prints, is absolutely worthless now. Worthless. I mean, my gallery in LA, Fahey Klein Gallery, when I did the last show there, which was of the Gray Ghost, which is a street photography book I did, New York street photography. I asked David if I should make silver prints for it, and he's like, nah, none of the collectors care. They just want images, right? So it's like, wow, that's crazy, man. You would have thought the opposite, you know, but that's not the case. So anyway, so like that skill is completely obsolete. So I guess the point is, distinguish yourself by making compelling images. That's how you can do it. And I think that if you make images that move people, you know, I mean, how many images are being made this year? What's the statistic? National Geographic came up with a statistic. I think 2019, it's like 28 billion images in the U.S. alone.
Probably trillions, who knows?
No, it's in the billions
yeah.
still, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Well, Dan, man, can't thank you enough. Like I said, I've been following your work for years and really appreciate the passion you bring in this. You're just a photo junkie, man, and it comes off. So I really appreciate you taking time. Let me come down to your studio, dude.
Yeah.
And for people listening, where's the best place to check out your work?
I would say there's a pretty big internet presence, you know, like if you just Googled my name, website, and other stuff comes up. So.
And you're on Instagram at I think was it Dan Winters or Dan Winters?
I think it's
Photo?
Dan Winters Photo. Yeah,
I'll link it. I'll link him. People can go check it out. And thanks so much.
You bet. My pleasure.